What if the greatest decade in movie history was also the one that almost killed the movies? The 1970s gave us The Godfather and Star Wars. It also gave studios a run of huge, expensive flops, so bad that some nearly went broke. Every single year, one film lost more money than all the rest. These are the biggest box office bombs of the 1970s, the disasters that turned Hollywood gold into red ink. Let us count them down, one year at a time. Number 20. Meteor 1979. In 1979, while Hurricane was drowning at sea, another all-star disaster was crashing to Earth. It was called Meteor, and it helped kill an entire studio. The setup sounds like a can't-miss idea. A giant space rock, 5 miles wide, is hurtling toward Earth, and only a team of scientists can stop it. To save the day, the studio hired Sean Connery, fresh from playing James Bond. Around him they placed a stunning cast, including Natalie Wood in one of her final films, plus Karl Malden, Martin Landau, and even the legendary Henry Fonda as the president. The studio behind it, American International Pictures, was known for cheap movies and wanted to prove it could play in the big leagues. The budget swelled to $16 million, a huge sum for that company. Much of the money vanished into troubled special effects. Whole teams of effects artists were hired, then fired, then hired again, each new group racing to finish with whatever cash was left. It showed on screen. Critics mocked the Meteor itself, with one saying it looked like something old and green found at the back of a fridge. When Meteor opened, audiences shrugged. It arrived at the very tail end of the disaster movie craze, when people were sick of the formula. It earned back only around half its budget. The loss was so severe that it helped push American International Pictures into a buyout, effectively ending the company. The studio reached for the stars and got buried by a rock. Number 19. The Swarm, 1978. Next up, 1978, and one of the strangest all-star disasters ever filmed. It was called The Swarm, and its enemy was not a fire or a flood. It was bees. The man behind it was Irwin Allen, known as the Master of Disaster. He had made two of the biggest hits of the decade, The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno. People trusted him with disaster films, so he gathered a jaw-dropping cast to fight a swarm of deadly African bees invading Texas. The lineup was stunning, including Michael Caine, Henry Fonda, Richard Widmark, Olivia de Havilland, and Fred MacMurray in his final film. Between them, these actors held a shelf full of Oscars. The budget was enormous for the time, around $21 million. That was nearly double what Star Wars had cost the year before. But the money did not end up on the screen. Most of it went to the giant cast, and the bee attacks looked cheap and silly. Critics tore it apart. Many called it one of the worst movies ever made, and even Michael Caine later admitted it was one of his worst films. When it opened, audiences stayed away. The Swarm earned back only a fraction of its cost. It was quickly overshadowed by the summer hit Grease. The failure was so bad that Irwin Allen forbade anyone near him from ever mentioning it again. Worse, it helped drive the final nail into the disaster movie craze he had built. The Master of Disaster had made one disaster too many, and this one was real. Number 18. New York, 1977. Now back to 1977. The same year Sorcerer got crushed by Star Wars. That year had a second big flop, and it came from another brilliant young director losing his way. It was Martin Scorsese, and the film was New York, New York. Scorsese was red hot. He had just made Taxi Driver, a raw and shocking hit. For his next move, he did something strange. He decided to make a big, glossy tribute to the old Hollywood musicals of the 1940s. He cast Robert De Niro as a selfish jazz saxophone player and Liza Minnelli as the singer who loves him. The whole thing was shot on fancy fake studio sets, on purpose, to look like an old movie. The making of it was a nightmare. Scorsese was deep in a cocaine addiction at the time, and he later admitted he was too high to figure out the story. The film had no finished script, so the actors improvised endless scenes. It ballooned in cost to around $14 million and swelled to an exhausting length. When it opened, audiences did not connect with it. The lead character was cruel and hard to like, and the mix of old-style glamour with modern grit left people cold. It failed to turn a profit. The studio had actually bet against another of its own films, a little boxing movie called Rocky, expecting Rocky to flop instead. In the end, Rocky became a smash, and its profits paid for the losses on New York, New York. The one lasting gift was the title song, which became a worldwide standard. Number 17. Nickelodeon, 1976. Back to 1976 now, and the sad next chapter in a story we already started. Remember Peter Bogdanovich, the golden boy whose musical At Long Last Love bombed in 1975? Well, in 1976 he did it again, with a film called Nickelodeon. After the beating he took, you might expect him to play it safe. Instead, he made another expensive, old-fashioned tribute to a bygone era. Nickelodeon was a comedy about the wild early days of the silent film business, when movies were new and nobody knew the rules. He cast big names, including Ryan O'Neal, Burt Reynolds, and young Tatum O'Neal. This time, the studio was nervous. They had watched his last movie fail, so they fought him on everything. They overruled his casting choices. They forced him to shoot in color when he wanted black and white. Bogdanovich felt like he was talking into a void, unable to get anyone to listen to his vision. The result flopped at the box office. It was now his third failure in a row, after Daisy Miller and At Long Last Love. The Wonder Boy who could once do no wrong had officially become box office poison. The fall was complete. The strangest part came next. Bogdanovich said that once people saw him as a loser, they suddenly became kind to him, offering him more job offers than ever, all eager to hear him complain about the flop. But he was so bruised that he took 3 years off from directing to lick his wounds. 1 year, 1 bomb, and a career that never fully recovered. Number 16. The Hindenburg, 1975. Now back to 1975. That year gave us the disaster of At Long Last Love, but it also gave us a disaster movie that became a real one. It was called The Hindenburg. The director was Robert Wise, and this is what makes it so strange. Wise was a giant. He had directed West Side Story and The Sound of Music, 2 of the most beloved films ever made. He knew how to make magic, so Universal handed him a big budget, around $15 million, to make a disaster movie about the famous German airship that burst into flames in 1937. There was one huge problem baked into the whole idea. Everyone already knew how it ended. The Hindenburg blows up. That is the entire reason the event is famous. So the movie spent almost 2 long hours following passengers on a slow blimp ride, trying to build suspense about a fiery crash that the audience was simply waiting for. Critics pounced. Roger Ebert joked that the film cost so much yet made people laugh out loud at all the wrong moments. Others called it boring and pointless. The special effects for the final explosion were genuinely impressive, so much so that the film won special Oscars for its visual and sound work. But awards could not fill the seats. The Hindenburg opened weakly and never caught fire with audiences, earning back very little of its huge cost. One critic even named it the worst disaster film of the year. A master director, a famous tragedy, and a mountain of money, all of it going down in flames. Number 15. The Little Prince, 1974. Back to 1974 now. That year, the biggest bomb was Lucille Ball's Mame, but it was not the only musical to crash. There was also a gentle, doomed little film called The Little Prince. On paper, this had golden blood in its veins. The songs were written by Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Lovey, the legendary team behind My Fair Lady, Gigi, and Camelot. It was directed by Stanley Donen, the man who made Singin' in the Rain. It was based on one of the most beloved books in the world, the tender fable about a pilot in the desert who meets a boy prince from a tiny asteroid. It even featured Bob Fosse dancing as a snake and Gene Wilder as a wise fox. So what went wrong? For one thing, the movie musical was dying fast, and audiences had grown tired of the whole form. For another, the production was full of anger. The songwriter Lerner was furious with the director, later accusing Donen of butchering the music, changing tempos and cutting phrases until the score was unrecognizable. The two sides were at war. The film had a small budget of $6 million, which does not sound like much, but here is the shocking part. It did not even earn $1 million back. Almost nobody came to see it. The failure quietly ended Stanley Donen's career as a musical director. It was also the final work that Lerner and Lowe ever made together, a sad and bitter goodbye for one of the greatest songwriting teams in history. Number 14. The Day of the Dolphin, 1973. Back to 1973. That year gave us the legendary flop of Lost Horizon, but it also gave us one of the oddest ideas ever handed a big budget. It was called The Day of the Dolphin. Try to picture the pitch. A brilliant scientist teaches 2 dolphins to speak English. Then a group of villains kidnaps the dolphins and tries to use them to carry a bomb and assassinate the President of the United States. Yes, that is the actual plot. Talking dolphins in an assassination plot. The wild part is the talent involved. This was no cheap movie. It was directed by Mike Nichols, one of the most respected directors alive, fresh off huge hits like The Graduate. It starred George C. Scott, a powerhouse actor who had just won an Oscar for Patton. These were serious, gifted people making a movie about dolphins that talk. Nichols played it completely straight, treating the silly premise with total seriousness. Some viewers were genuinely moved by it, especially by the emotional ending, but most people simply could not buy the idea, and many laughed it right off the screen. The famous critic Pauline Kael suggested that if this was the best idea Nichols could come up with, he should quit making movies altogether. When it opened, The Day of the Dolphin sank fast. It was a big, expensive bomb that vanished quickly. Worse, it broke the winning streak of Mike Nichols, one of the hottest directors of his time. He would stumble for years afterward, and would not fully find his footing again for the better part of a decade. Number 13. Young Winston, 1972. Back to 1972 now. That year's biggest bomb was the musical Man of La Mancha. But there was another expensive flop, and this one was a prestige British epic. It was called Young Winston. The subject seemed as safe as could be. The film told the early life story of Winston Churchill, the future British Prime Minister, and one of the most famous men of the century. It covered his unhappy school days, his daring adventures as a young soldier and reporter in Africa, and his first steps into politics. The talent was serious. It was directed by Richard Attenborough, in his very first film as a director, long before he would win Oscars for Gandhi. The cast was stacked with British greats, including Robert Shaw, Anne Bancroft, and a young Anthony Hopkins. It was mounted as a lavish, big-screen roadshow event, the kind of grand production that studios had leaned on for years. And that was part of the problem. By 1972, the era of the huge, stately roadshow epic was dying. Audiences wanted something faster, rawer, and more modern. A dignified, slow-moving history lesson about a British statesman was a hard sell, especially in America, where the film opened, played briefly, and quickly disappeared. In Britain, critics loved it, and it even won a Best Picture award from London film critics. But love from critics did not fill theaters across the ocean. Young Winston flopped where it needed to succeed, becoming one more grand old-fashioned production that the changing world had left behind. Attenborough would have to wait 10 more years for his triumph. Number 12. Nicholas and Alexandra, 1971. Back to 1971. The biggest loss that year was The Last Valley, but right beside it stood another expensive, sweeping epic that failed to find a crowd. It was called Nicholas and Alexandra. This was a grand historical drama about the fall of the Russian royal family. It told the tragic story of Tsar Nicholas II and his wife Alexandra, the last rulers of Imperial Russia, following them through World War I and the revolution that ended in their deaths. The famous producer Sam Spiegel, who had made giant hits like Lawrence of Arabia, was behind it. Spiegel spared little expense, filming in Spain and the former Yugoslavia with a huge cast and lavish sets and costumes. He filled the smaller roles with respected actors, including Laurence Olivier and a young Ian Holm. It looked expensive because it was, costing around $9 million. There was a curious choice at the center of it all. For such a huge, costly film, Spiegel cast two relative unknowns, Michael Jaston and Janet Suzman, in the leading roles. There was no giant movie star to pull people into theaters. The film was beautiful and respectable, and it even won Oscars for its costumes and art direction. But respect is not the same as excitement. Audiences did not turn out. Nicholas and Alexandra earned back less than it cost, and landed as a commercial failure. It was praised as one of the better films of the year by some critics, yet it still lost money. It was proof that in the 1970s, even a gorgeous, well-made epic could sink if audiences simply did not care. Number 11. The Molly Maguires, 1970. Finally, we end all the way back at the start, in 1970. The biggest bomb that year was Darling Lili, but there was another costly failure that broke a great director's heart. It was called The Molly Maguires. This was a serious, gritty drama set in the Pennsylvania coal country of the 1870s. It told the true story of a secret group of Irish miners who fought back against brutal working conditions, and the undercover detective sent to destroy them from the inside. It was a story about workers, injustice, and betrayal. The star power was real. Sean Connery, the world's most famous man from the James Bond films, played the rebel leader. Richard Harris, a huge name at the time, played the detective who infiltrates them. The director was Martin Ritt, a respected filmmaker who cared deeply about stories of ordinary working people. The budget was large for the era, around $11 million. Then it opened, and almost nobody came. The Molly Maguires earned back only about $2 million, a fraction of what it cost. It was one of the most complete financial disasters of the year. The very things that made it good, its slow pace and its heavy, downbeat mood, were blamed for keeping crowds away. The failure crushed its director, Martin Ritt believed the flop permanently damaged his career, and it was years before he fully recovered, later winning acclaim with Norma Rae. Two of the biggest stars alive could not save a serious film about coal miners. It was a quiet, painful start to the whole decade of disasters we have just counted down twice. Number 10. Darling Lili, 1970. In 1970, the director Blake Edwards teamed up with the biggest star in the world, Julie Andrews. She was fresh off Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music. She could do no wrong. So Paramount handed Edwards a fortune to make Darling Lili, a big musical spy romance set during World War I. Andrews would play a beloved English singer who was secretly a German spy. Rock Hudson would play the American pilot who falls for her. Then came the part that really stung. When Darling Lili finally opened, almost nobody came. It earned back only about $3 million in rentals. It was not even close to breaking even. For such a costly film, it landed as one of the lowest earners of the whole year. The damage went beyond one film. Darling Lili was part of a string of flops that pushed Paramount into serious money trouble in the early 1970s. It became a symbol of everything going wrong with the old studio way of doing things. Spend big, cast a huge star, make it grand, and pray. The praying had stopped working. Blake Edwards never forgot the pain. Years later, in 1981, he made a movie called S.O.B. that openly mocked the whole disaster he had lived through. He turned his own flop into a joke, which is one way to heal. Here is the strange twist. Blake Edwards and Julie Andrews had gotten married right before the film came out. So their first big project as a married couple was a public failure. Both of them bounced back later. Edwards revived the Pink Panther films. Andrews reinvented herself in Victor Victoria. But in 1970, standing in the wreckage of Darling Lili, none of that comeback was promised. It was just a very expensive lesson, and the first big bomb of a very rough decade. Number 9. The Last Valley, 1971. Not every bomb is a bad movie. Some are good films that simply nobody wanted to watch. That is the sad story of The Last Valley, the biggest money loser of 1971. This one was a passion project for James Clavell, the writer who would later create Shogun. He wrote it, directed it, and poured himself into it. The setting was unusual and heavy. It took place during the 30 Years' War in Europe, a brutal religious conflict from the 1600s. The story follows a band of tired, violent soldiers for hire who stumble onto one hidden valley that the war has not yet touched. Do they burn it down like everything else, or do they leave it in peace? To sell such a grim idea, Clavell got two huge stars. Michael Caine played the hardened captain. Omar Sharif played the gentle teacher who tries to save the valley. Caine, oddly, played a German, and he chose to speak careful, precise English instead of faking a heavy accent. It was the biggest budget the studio behind it had ever spent on a single film. Caine alone was paid $750,000. Sharif got $600,000. And then it opened, and the seats stayed empty. The numbers are almost hard to believe. In the United States and Canada, The Last Valley earned rentals of only $380,000. Think about that. Two of the most famous actors alive, a huge budget, and it pulled in less than $500,000 in its home market. Overseas, it did a little better, but not enough. When all the costs were counted, the film recorded a loss of over $7 million. For 1971, that was a staggering hole. Number 8. Man of La Mancha, 1972. Some flops are almost poetic. Man of La Mancha was a movie about a man who chases an impossible dream, and the movie itself became an impossible dream that crashed to Earth. That is a cruel kind of irony, and it made this the biggest bomb of 1972. The source was pure gold. Man of La Mancha was a smash Broadway musical based on the story of Don Quixote, the old knight who charges at windmills and refuses to see the world as it really is. Its famous song, The Impossible Dream, was everywhere. United Artists had paid a huge sum for the film rights, one of the largest amounts ever paid for a musical at the time. Expectations were sky high. The casting is where things got strange. The lead role was Cervantes and Don Quixote, and it went to Peter O'Toole, one of the greatest actors of his generation. There was one small issue. O'Toole could not really sing. His singing had to be dubbed by another performer. Playing opposite him was Sophia Loren as the servant girl Aldonza. She was a global icon, but she was not a trained singer either. A big musical built on two stars who could not carry the songs was a risky bet. The production was a mess behind the scenes too. It went through several directors and several writers before it settled. The whole thing was financed by an Italian producer and shot in Rome. The budget climbed to around $11 or $12 million, which was serious money for the early 1970s. At first, it looked like it might work. When Man of La Mancha opened during the 1972 Christmas season, it actually topped the box office for a week. People were curious, but curiosity faded fast. Once word got around, the crowds thinned. In the end, the film earned only about $3.8 million in rentals in the United States and Canada. Against that big budget, it was a clear loss. Number 7. Lost Horizon 1973. Now we reach a flop so famous that it earned its own nickname. People started calling it Lost Investment. That tells you everything about the biggest bomb of 1973, the musical remake of Lost Horizon. The idea came from Ross Hunter, a producer with a golden touch. He had made hit after hit, including the huge disaster movie Airport in 1970. He felt unstoppable. So he left his longtime studio, signed with Columbia, and decided to remake a classic. The original Lost Horizon, made by Frank Capra back in 1937, was a beloved story about travelers who crash in the mountains and find Shangri-La, a hidden paradise where no one grows old and sadness does not exist. When it opened, the mockery was instant and merciless. One critic said the movie must have arrived in garbage cans rather than film cans. The singer Bette Midler joked that she never missed a Liv Ullmann musical, which was a sharp way of saying nobody wanted to see one. The film was later placed in a book titled The 50 Worst Films of All Time. It became a punchline. Why did it fail so hard? Like the other musicals on this list, it was the wrong movie at the wrong moment. In 1973, audiences wanted grit and realism. They wanted to see their own troubled world on screen. Instead, Lost Horizon offered a soft, old-fashioned dream about a magic land where everything is nice. To viewers in a cynical decade, it felt fake and silly. Critics even pointed out that the paradise on screen looked less like heaven and more like a fancy garden in California. Number 6. MAME 1974. This next one hurts because it happened to someone almost everyone loved. In 1974, the biggest bomb of the year was MAME, and it marked the sad final film of a true American legend, Lucille Ball. For decades, Lucille Ball was the queen of television. I Love Lucy made her one of the most famous and beloved people on the planet. She was funny, warm, and unstoppable. So when Warner Bros. Decided to make a film of the hit Broadway musical MAME, Ball chased the lead role hard, and she got it. MAME is the story of a rich, wild, big-hearted woman in old New York who suddenly has to raise her young nephew. It is a splashy, joyful part. The warnings turned out to be true. Ball was in her early 60s when she made MAME, and years of heavy smoking had wrecked her singing voice. Her numbers had to be spliced together line by line, from many takes, just to sound passable. To hide her age, the camera shot her in soft, blurry focus. It was so noticeable that the critic Rex Reed cruelly joked it looked like they had rubbed chicken fat on the lens. The budget was around $12 million. When the film opened at Easter in 1974, it actually did huge business for a moment. At Radio City Music Hall in New York, it broke house records, pulling in massive numbers on a single day. For a brief second, it looked like a hit. Then the reviews hit, and they were savage. Critics tore into Ball's performance without mercy. One writer in the New York Times called her the biggest turkey in the whole show. The warm feelings the public had for Lucy could not survive that beating. After its strong start, MAME faded fast at theaters across the country. It ended up earning back only about half of its budget. It joined the long, sad list of failed movie musicals of the era. Number 5. At Long Last Love 1975. Sometimes a bomb is fueled by pure confidence. A director gets so hot and so sure of himself that he stops listening to anyone. That is the story of At Long Last Love, the biggest bomb of 1975, and the film that nearly destroyed a genius. The director was Peter Bogdanovich, and in the early 1970s he was on fire. He had made 3 straight hits that critics adored: The Last Picture Show, What's Up, Doc, and Paper Moon. He was seen as one of the brilliant young leaders of the new Hollywood. He loved old movies, especially the glamorous musicals of the 1930s, so he decided to make his own tribute to them, a fizzy romance filled with the songs of Cole Porter. Because he was so successful, the studio said yes, even though musicals were box office poison at the time. He cast his girlfriend, Sybil Shepherd, in the lead. He cast Burt Reynolds, a huge star, as the male lead. He added the wonderful Madeline Kahn and Eileen Brennan. The story was light, just some rich, silly couples falling in and out of love in fancy old New York. Then Bogdanovich made the choice that sank the ship. In old Hollywood musicals, actors sang to a recording made earlier, then moved their lips to match. Bogdanovich refused to do that. He insisted his cast sing live on set, in the moment, with microphones catching every note. It was a bold, artsy idea, meant to feel real and fresh. There was just one catch. His stars could not really sing. Burt Reynolds and Sybil Shepherd were charming people, but they were not singers. Recording them live meant every flat note and every gasp for breath was baked right into the film forever. What was meant to feel authentic just felt painful. Number 4. The Bluebird, 1976. Our next bomb might be the strangest movie on this entire list. It brought together Hollywood royalty, a legendary director, and the Soviet Union, all at the height of the Cold War. The result was a beautiful mess. This is The Bluebird, the biggest bomb of 1976. The idea alone is wild. In the mid-1970s, the United States and the Soviet Union were bitter rivals, but relations had thawed just enough to try something new. Someone had the idea to make the first ever film jointly produced by both countries. An American studio and a Soviet studio would work together. It was meant to be a symbol of peace, a bridge across the Iron Curtain. The story they chose was a gentle old fairy tale about two poor children who go on a magical journey to find the Bluebird of happiness, only to learn it was in their own backyard all along. To direct, they hired George Cukor, a true Hollywood legend behind classics like My Fair Lady. To star, they gathered an incredible cast. Elizabeth Taylor played 4 different roles. Jane Fonda played Knight. Ava Gardner played Luxury. Cicely Tyson played a cat. It was a lineup of some of the most famous women in the world. Then reality set in, and reality was brutal. When The Bluebird finally reached theaters, it landed with a thud. Critics savaged it. It holds one of the lowest possible approval scores among the reviews from that time. People called it dull and noisy at the same time. A strange, patched-together film that felt like it cost almost nothing despite its huge budget and famous faces. Audiences stayed away in droves. The failure did more than lose money. It killed the whole idea it was born from. The grand experiment of American and Soviet studios working together was judged a flop, and no one rushed to try it again. A project meant to bring two nations closer instead became a symbol of how hard it was for them to work together at all. Number 3. Sorcerer, 1977. Now we come to the turning point. This is the flop that many people say marked the end of an entire era in Hollywood. It was a great film, made by a brilliant director, and it was crushed by the worst possible bad luck. This is Sorcerer, the biggest bomb of 1977. The director was William Friedkin, and he was untouchable. He had just made 2 of the biggest films of the decade, The French Connection and The Exorcist. Both won Oscars. Both made piles of money. Friedkin could do whatever he wanted, and he knew it. His new project was a tense thriller about 4 desperate criminals hiding in a poor jungle town. They take a suicidal job. They must drive 2 old trucks loaded with sweating, unstable dynamite across 200 miles of brutal jungle road. One hard bump and it all explodes. It started as a small idea with a budget of $2.5 million, but Friedkin wanted it big and real. So the shoot moved to the jungles of the Dominican Republic, and the costs exploded. He built one scene around a rickety rope bridge in a raging storm. That single sequence took months to film and cost around $3 million all by itself. When rivers dried up, the crew tore the bridge down and rebuilt it somewhere else. By the end, the budget had ballooned to $22 million. It got so expensive that 2 studios had to share the cost. Friedkin had made a bold, gritty, powerful movie, and then fate stepped in and destroyed him. Number 2. The Wiz, 1978. Some bombs leave nothing behind but a crater. This next one is different. It lost a fortune, yet it accidentally launched the biggest music career in history. This is The Wiz, the biggest bomb of 1978. A failure with a stunning silver lining. The casting caused the first crack. On Broadway, a young performer named Stephanie Mills had made the role of Dorothy famous. But Diana Ross, the superstar, wanted the part badly and pushed hard to get it. She landed it. The trouble was that Ross was 33 years old, far too old for the young girl Dorothy is supposed to be. So the whole story was rewritten to make Dorothy a grown woman, a shy Harlem schoolteacher. The original director quit over the change, and Lumet stepped in. The rest of the cast was stacked with talent. Michael Jackson, still young, played the Scarecrow in his very first movie role. The comedian Richard Pryor played the Wiz himself. The legend Lena Horne appeared as a good witch. The film reimagined the land of Oz as New York City, with the Emerald City set right between the towers of the World Trade Center, lit by tens of thousands of bulbs. It was also wildly expensive. The budget hit $24 million, making it the most costly movie musical ever made up to that point. Everything about it was big, from the sets, to the costumes, to the dance numbers spread across the city. The damage spread beyond one movie. Many people say The Wiz was such a costly flop that it scared studios away from making big-budget films with mostly black casts for years afterward. Number 1. Hurricane 1979. We end the decade with a fitting finish. By 1979, one of the most popular movie trends of the 1970s was running out of steam, and our final bomb helped drive the last nail into its coffin. This is Hurricane, the biggest bomb of 1979. Into this fading trend stepped Dino De Laurentiis, a larger-than-life Italian producer known for big, bold, expensive gambles. He had just remade King Kong a few years earlier. Now he set out to remake another classic, John Ford's 1937 film, The Hurricane, a romance and disaster tale set on a beautiful island in the South Pacific. The plan was grand, a forbidden love story between a young island chief and an American woman, all leading up to a massive hurricane that tears the island apart. The production had drama before it even started. The film was originally set up for the director Roman Polanski. But Polanski fled the United States to avoid the law, and De Laurentiis suddenly needed a new director. He hired a respected Swedish filmmaker named Jan Troell to take over at the last minute. De Laurentiis spared no expense. He moved the entire production to the remote island of Bora Bora. He even built a hotel there to house the cast and crew. He hired real stars, including Mia Farrow, Jason Robards, and Max von Sydow. The budget reached $22 million, an enormous sum for 1979. The special effects team built a huge, believable storm for the big finish. None of it mattered. When Hurricane opened, audiences simply did not care. So there you have it. 20 films, 10 long years, and enough lost money to sink a studio, which in a few cases it actually did. Some of these flops were lazy cash grabs. Others were bold, brilliant swings that simply landed at the worst possible time. A few are quietly loved today. So tell me this, out of all 20 of these disasters, which one truly deserved to fail, and which one was just too good, too soon? Drop your pick in the comments, and let the argument begin.